Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, welcome. My name is Heather, and on this channel I like to walk a very fine line between a shopping addicted makeup monster and a responsible adult with a makeup hobby. Now, I really enjoy eyeshadow singles, duochromes, multichromes, blush, highlight, lip gloss, basically everything except pressed glitter, and today we're going to be talking about 10 palettes, well, 12 palettes, 10 palettes that if I could get a backup of them out of my entire collection, the top 10 palettes I would want to ensure I got a backup of. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, stick with me, we're getting into it right now. I initially gave myself 10 palettes, right? And as I started building my list, I wanted to make sure they were from 10 different brands. I didn't want to just overload with brands that I really like the formulas of. And so I found myself stuck between two palettes from two different brands. So I'm going to talk about those first. The one brand that I kind of got stuck between was Glamlite. And as you guys know, I really love this Creeps and Crawls palette. This is this gorgeous, super deep smoky palette. And I particularly love this very dark blue kind of denim-y midnight shade, right? And so in my mind, I'm like, if I'm only going to have a backup of a handful of palettes, this is one for sure I need to have a backup of. But then I remembered this palette, and this palette I've been really obsessed with recently. This is the Cookies and Cream Glamlite palette, and again, it has a really beautiful blue, and it has some really nice kind of cool toned neutrals in here. You've got these kind of soft denim-y matte blues, and then I really like how this is sort of like a slate gray blue. I think that looks very flattering on the eyes. So between the two of these, I couldn't decide, which is how my list crept from 10 to 12. So I have those two. And then the other brand where I could not make a decision one way or another was Glamshop. So initially, I thought about the Niebieski 2020 palette because the metallics in here are so like sparkly and dimensional. Like you can see they just catch light beautifully. And I just thought, man, I can't be without that palette because the blues are so gorgeous, and every time I wear them, it just looks like it pops so nicely. But then I remembered Laguna, and I have to be careful with this one because it's going to fall apart. And Laguna has some really gorgeous shades too, like this swampy green down here. This like shimmery shade up here has a really like electric green sparkly duochrome quality to it, which I really appreciate. I love this kind of like blue metallic as well. So again, when I got down to the two of them, I was like, it has to be one or the other. I couldn't pick, so I thought I'd mention both. But from here on out, it's just 8 more palettes. So everything else follows the rules. But they were my rules, so of course I broke them. Next, and these are in no real particular order, but next I have the Beaute. This is the Dare to Be Shocking palette, and again, it just has those really beautiful blues. It has a couple pops of green, but I really like the blues and grays over in this area. I don't really bother too much with this part other than to sort of complete my look, inner corner highlight kind of thing, but the blues over here are really special, and I love this kind of like plummy metallic. It always looks so beautiful whenever I do looks with this palette, so I definitely wanted to make sure I had a backup of this one. Next is the Blend Bunny Lure palette, and this one, of course, another Mermaid Dream. I like this one a lot because you have this really beautiful row of cool tone neutrals, and this particular shade is a multi-chrome. It kind of pools a little bit pink, but it has this sort of glowy champagne quality to it as well. I think it's a very, very beautiful shade, and it makes the neutral looks that you do out of this palette a little bit more interesting. And then, of course, you have some wonderful like teals, and you've got purples and pinks, you've got some blues. The metallics in here are very sparkly and brilliant, so I had to include this one on my list. Another fun one, which I don't even think you can buy anymore, so this is very hypothetical, is the Kaleidos Astro pink palette. This is Futurism III, and I don't think they make any palettes like this anymore, which is sad because I think this was a cool concept. But this is what the color story looks like, and whenever I come into this palette, I usually end up doing like all of the sort of purpley taupey shades on top, this in the outer corner, and then this blue I end up putting on the lower lash line, and for some reason it just looks really like poppy and interesting. I don't know, they have very dimensional quality to the metallics in this particular palette, which for the time that it came out is actually pretty impressive, so definitely would want to make sure that I have a backup of this one. Next up is the BPerfect Carnival palette. This is one of the last palettes that I picked out to put on my list, and I think the reason for that is it's huge. And so for me, I was like, a backup, do I really need a backup of a giant rainbow palette? But then I started thinking, like, not only is it a giant rainbow palette, but it has these really beautiful, intense metallic shades. And then it has this whole area of like greeny, olivey, pewtery metallics too, that I feel like kind of get overlooked in other palettes. So for me, I definitely wanted to include this one on the list. Next up is the Colored Raine Thunder palette. If you guys can't tell, there's a bit of a theme going on. I'm really obsessed with blues right now. But this particular palette I think also has very beautiful shades in it. This metallic black in here is very stunning on the lids, and I love how this almost glows off of the eyelids because it's so light and intense. The mattes in here blend out really beautifully. I love that some of these almost pull even like plummy in quality, so it's a little bit more multi-dimensional than just being like gray and blue. In that same vein, and one of the palettes that sparked my motivation to even make this video is the Nyx Vintage Jean Baby palette, and it looks like this. Don't mind the white, I definitely gouged it with my fingernail when I almost dropped it on the floor one time. But this particular palette I think is really nice. You've got some shades that are a bit similar, like this shade right here, and then these two mattes here, like they do look kind of similar on the eyes, but I think because you have these sort of rosy browns and blues that you can kind of pull it one way or another, or sort of combine them together, and it just gives it a little bit more visual interest. I like this really deep metallic shade. I think that looks very pretty towards the outer corner, blended into like your darker mattes. And then of course this very special blue here, definitely something I would love to have a backup of, especially if I'm going to keep gouging it out with my fingernails. All right. Next up, and I'm sure this will be no surprise, I had to include an Odens Eye palette. Odens Eye was one that I had a really hard time not just picking like 10 Odens Eye palettes, because their shimmers are so special and interesting that I am constantly gravitating towards their palettes. But I picked out the Hela palette, and the reason is because of all of their palettes, this is the one that I go back to the most often. You have this beautiful multi-chrome in here, again another sparkly black. It's been my thing recently. You've got some like swampy green type pukey kind of shades, and then these really beautiful pinks. And I like that this shade has kind of a peachy quality to it. I think that makes it look really pretty and kind of sets it off from, you know, more typical sparkly pinks that you see in palettes. Plus, being that I work in medicine, like the anatomical hard and everything on here, like the artwork gets me too. And then last but not least is the Beaute Smokey Glam palette. And I figured if I was going to need a neutral palette somewhere in here, this would be a good one to pick because it's gorgeous. You've got some really beautiful like plummy purpley kind of shades in here, and then you've got some like softer pinks. I love this like little, it's called Milk Bath, and it's like a white, but it has like the tiniest hint of pink. It's like the La Croix of pink metallics. It thinks about being pink rather than actually being pink. But I think that looks really pretty on the lids. I like, again, you have some really nice dark deep shades that you can go into, and again you've got some shades here that almost pull in sort of like an olive or like stone type direction. I think that gives it a little bit more visual interest than just being grays. All right. And with that said, that is everything for this video. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe before you go, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.